US President Donald Trump has announced a new deadline for ending Russia's war against Ukraine, while in Europe, people have attacked the American president with criticism and accusations of weakness and cowardice. As Bloomberg reports today, US President Donald Trump's efforts to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine have stalled at the stage of peace negotiations, while fighting on the front lines has reached a stalemate. However, US allies say that Washington insists the peace agreement must now be reached by July 4th, the 250th anniversary of American independence. That is, Trump wants to appear at the parade and say that he stopped another war, regardless of the terms. In Europe, they openly criticized Donald Trump, saying that he gave the dictator Putin courage and confidence when he rolled out the red carpet for him and called him a friend. But Trump also refused to support Ukraine and made concessions to the Kremlin too early. This is now being stated publicly in Europe, but at the same time, Europe has directly stated that Russia's strategy in the war against Ukraine is not about capturing territory, but about something else. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. In addition, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So today, on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Bloomberg writes bluntly, President Donald Trump's efforts to end the Russian invasion of Ukraine have reached a deadlock. Peace talks are at a standstill, and after 4 years of full-scale war, the fighting has largely not stalled. But in the White House, they seem to refuse to see reality and claim that Donald Trump is demanding a peace deal. Before he holds the celebrations for the 250th anniversary of US independence on July 4th, and this is despite the fact that there are no signs that Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to reach an agreement that does not take his main demands into account. Ukraine rejects Russia's demands. Ukraine has withdrawn troops from fortified areas in eastern Donetsk region and proposed a ceasefire along the existing front lines. Meanwhile, the United States is proposing to create a free economic zone in the area, as well as to provide Ukraine with security guarantees against any future Russian attack. And so, according to sources, the negotiations have already gone beyond the established timelines, deadlines, and so on several times. Officials privately admit that they see no signs of Vladimir Putin being ready to abandon his maximalist positions. But Trump's people are still confident that he will be able to achieve peace, though admittedly at the cost of betraying Ukraine. But for Trump, the symbolism of July 4th is more important than any realities on the ground. He is convinced that he needs to appear at the parade on July 4th on US Independence Day and declare that he has stopped yet another war. And here let me remind you a bit that when Trump returned to the US presidency in January 2025 promising to quickly end the war, more than a year of US-led diplomacy had reached a dead end. And why did it reach a dead end? Because of the issue of Russia's demands regarding territories in eastern Ukraine and the question of control over the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, the Zaporizhzhia plant. Russia may boast about its successes on the front as much as it wants, but the reality is that Kremlin troops currently control 19% of Ukraine's territory, which is only 1 percentage point more than 3 years ago. And in 2022, let me remind you, these same Russians controlled 27% of the territory. And lastly, I'll add that 3 rounds of trilateral negotiations held this year in Abu Dhabi and Geneva did not lead to a solution to the problem. Ukraine's European allies are largely excluded from the negotiations, even though they are mainly financing the purchase of weapons to support Ukraine's defense after Trump cut off all military aid from the US. And here as well, it's also worth noting that Trump has repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with the slow pace of negotiations, often wavering between criticizing Putin and calling on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to make some concessions. But Putin has still not shown any signs of being ready to give up his demands. And now, after all this, Europe has directly stated that Donald Trump is to blame for the fact that Vladimir Putin still refuses to make concessions. Today, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius criticized US President Donald Trump for his approach to the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and Russia's war against Ukraine. Here is his quote. Unfortunately, the American president influenced the war and Vladimir Putin's self-confidence when he rolled out the red carpet and welcomed him as a friend in Alaska, while at the same time completely refusing military support for Ukraine. Unfortunately, the American president removed the issue of Ukraine's NATO membership from the agenda very early and unnecessarily. This could have been an issue that could be used for negotiations on other matters, well, hinting that it could have been a leverage point. At the same time, Pistorius stated that the Russian invasion has turned into a war of attrition, where Ukraine's key ally, the United States of America, has simply stopped providing support. Another quote, "There are almost no significant shifts on the battlefield." But what is much worse is that while Putin pretends to be negotiating, a war of terror is being waged against Ukrainian civilians. That's why it's so important that we don't stop or relax our support for Ukraine. And if you look at the state of the Russian economy, now is the right time to stay the course. At the same time, the commander of the National Armed Forces of Latvia, Kaspar Pudans, stated that Russia's strategy in Ukraine is not based on achieving success on the front lines. According to him, the main goal of the aggressor is to influence political will and reduce public support for the Ukrainian military and resistance. When Russia fails to achieve its goals on the front lines, it shells cities and civilians. In addition, Russia carries out terrorist attacks deep inside Ukraine. And now I will quote Pudans. Thanks to Ukraine's resistance, Latvia gets a chance to catch its breath for a while. This time should be used wisely, continuing to strengthen our defenses, and we must not stop. Even if a ceasefire is established in Ukraine, Moscow may try to take revenge against its neighbors, particularly Latvia. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily have to be a military attack, since the threat can manifest itself through propaganda, cyber operations, or economic actions. And now, after this, today Zelensky directly says, quote, "My message to Putin is simple. I am ready to meet. We must put an end to the war, period." But will Trump hear this, or will he once again claim that it is Ukraine that is dragging out the negotiations and does not want to end the war? That is a big question. Ukraine rejects Russia's demands to withdraw troops from fortified areas of Donbass and proposes a ceasefire along the line of contact, or as it is called, the front line. The United States proposes to create a demilitarized free economic zone in this area and also to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. But I should note that Trump only promises to provide all this after the peace agreement is signed. The final decision on the fate of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has also not yet been made, although the United States has stated that dividing control over it will be a crucial part of any agreement. But why did Trump suddenly decide that Ukrainians would say, all right, let's share our Ukrainian nuclear power plant with the unwashed Muscovites? And here is where there's a trap with Donald Trump's deadline. After all, Putin might agree to a ceasefire, which would allow Trump to claim success in ending the war right at the July 4th parade. But at the same time, Russia will continue its campaign of sabotage, terrorist attacks, hybrid warfare, or election interference aimed at destabilizing Ukraine. And don't forget that Trump has expressed interest in joint American-Russian business deals if the war ends. Therefore, Putin may agree to a fake ceasefire at the front, but will simply continue the war in a different format, while Trump will claim that he has ended yet another war. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation or subscription using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.